We're back as always. I hate that we say that every time.
Yeah.
We've got to come up with a new one still a year later. But
it's not exhilarating anymore. So
it isn't exhilarating. It might be exciting or another superlative. But we're back here today. My trusty counterpart, Bobby Nealon.
What's good?
Thanks for making the trek up to the big city.
Oh yeah, it's a lot better than at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah, the afternoon ones are much easier, I assume. And Mr. William Fox, the GM of drilling at Corva.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks for coming on, man. We appreciate it. So I'll let you introduce the topic because you know a little bit more about it, the story of the
again,
episode.
just kind of another AI gone wrong, or just AI used improperly. Well, maybe not improperly because the guy made $10 million.
Depends on who you are.
But then he got busted. But the music producer was created thousands of bots to basically listen to his songs on all the different streaming platforms, and apparently made $10 million off of it. And the FBI eventually cracked down and caught him. But
don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yeah, don't let bots on your hell of an operator. But
it turns out just automating fraud still fraud.
Yeah, believe it or not. I think it just kind of highlights just in general these days. I mean, like, this is such a new space. AI, I think it's been a concept forever.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as actually seeing it in practice, commercialized, for good or for bad, we're on the forefront of it. And just, there's a lot of probably, FUD, fear, uncertainty, doubt around AI, and, probably nowhere greater than that. We've talked about a lot, but then oil and gas, where we've talked about the risk and everything associated with it. So
we have FUD everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not unique to one specific thing. I think it's interesting because it opens up the whole AI safety stuff and all that. But to me, it's one of those things, especially with the whole open source community. Once it's out, and you can't really control the cat's out of the bag. You cannot put it back in and to certain things. So that means by default, kind of like we were talking about on another episode, but it's like by default, you have to kind of architect things knowing that people will at some point try and use them improperly.
Yeah.
But then that becomes this whole like philosophical debate about, well, should you create it if you know that there will be the potential that it could be used improperly?
But if not us, then Russia, China, whoever else, but
someone else does. Or it's like, how many technologies have been invented that are that, like nuclear, right? Like that's a big counter thing for nuclear.
It could either save the world, if you're worried about the climate, or it could destroy the world for World War III, nuclear war. So
it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think you have to be terrified of it. You just have to be aware of the potential consequences of these things and stuff like that. But,
sure. But yeah, I mean, with William's experience at Corva, and I think probably their foray into some AI stuff. Love to get your kind of pulse on some of that. And
well, it's funny because as somebody who kind of deals with an operational AI system every day, I have much less fear about it taking over the world than maybe.
You definitely know its limitations.
Yeah, exactly. And our flagship AI product is called Predictive Drilling, and there really is an AI piece to this, which is that the R&D team at Corva has spent, at this point, going on 7 years, figuring out how to build a predictive model for rate of penetration based on about 20 inputs. And then what we're doing is training models either for one basin or for one particular customer in a basin, or across, in weird situations. Sometimes they work across basins, kind of like counterintuitively. And the AI portion of what we are doing is never going to be pressing the nuclear button, because what it is doing is creating set points for an auto driller. And we're integrating with a rig auto driller to then, based on the simulation, to yield the highest rate of penetration within the limits that we're given, the safety limits of the rig, the limits from the roadmap from the drilling engineer. Pick the best set points, make the most use of weight on bit, stay under your differential pressure limit, and so on. And what's different from your best driller doing that, basically, because it won't beat your best driller, is it's like your 85th percentile driller all the time, day or night, rain or shine, and follows the plan. And then every 15 seconds, completely does the parameter sweep and sends those set points back to the rig to execute. So it is actually making use of a multivariate objective function using an AI model to predict ROP and then selecting set points, but it is very constrained. You know, this is not a general purpose AI tool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you've got, I mean, we're kind of relating this back a little bit on the development side. We actually implemented, I've been talking about this development tool called Cursor for a while, but we just signed up for the enterprise plan and are rolling it out to all of our developers to start using in order to get that 10x out of a junior developer, enabling him to do stuff with AI literally amplifies or magnifies the amount of work he can do. It's the same kind of concept as what you guys are doing, right? You don't have to have a 10-year driller out there. You can bring someone in that's a little bit more junior, maybe a little bit more cheap, maybe in a more established basin to try out so they can learn in an accelerated fashion without the risk that we always talk about in oil and gas, which is, you know, catastrophic failure and all of these really scary things. And that's like a perfect use case from my perspective, coming from the field. The only way to learn in the field is by doing. And so that's terrifying when you go out on your first day, week, month as an engineer in the field. You're like, well, shit, this could go wrong really quickly. And you're there with your mentor or whatever, but it's like at some point, you know, the mentor leaves and you're there by yourself, and you know, it might be 6 months, a year, whatever. You still don't have a ton of experience, so to speak.
Yeah. And then a downturn comes and you all get fired.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's, I think the big macro trend I'm seeing across pretty much every platform, at least in oil and gas on the software side, is really, at least the ones that are being successful, is really around how we do more with less from a personnel perspective, right? Because we have had such attrition, downturns, et cetera, that just kind of compound all of these things. And so I don't see, you know, operators running to hire more people back anytime soon, unless prices just go crazy. So these are the types of things that we have to implement in order to keep maintaining, because no one has hired back after -30 and then COVID, right? Like, but stuff has slowly crept up, right?
Well, but you bring up a good point, which is sort of twofold. One, you know, we did a study with neighbors. They can go pull the number of HMI interactions, human machine interface interactions, and a driller without something like this is doing about 250 interactions per 1,000 feet.
Wow.
And with this, we've gotten as low as 1.5 per 1,000 feet.
That's insane. Yeah.
But the flip side of that is, we do our weekly or our end of pad or end of well sort of call in with the super and the company man, and they go, my driller's getting lazy. And like, well, that's an interesting point, because to your point about how do I learn? So one of the things that Ryan, our CEO, has challenged us to do is to make the app tell you why it's doing what it's doing. And they may not want to look. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you trust it enough. But on the other hand, to your point about learning, okay, why is it lowering weight on bit right now? Well, now the banner says, well, you're about to hit, we're projecting that you're going to hit your differential pressure limit. Therefore, we're going to bring weight on bit down 8% for the next, 50 feet. Yeah. So at least it's not a black box that we're just asking you to trust. It is a system that is giving you enough information back, if you're in that chair, that you can understand why it's doing what it's doing, and then go, oh, okay, I believe that.
There's an actual
that makes sense.
Feedback loop element to
exactly.
it. Right?
Exactly.
No, I think that's brilliant.
And I think my favorite things as I heard it was like augmented intelligence versus artificial intelligence. I mean, like, you still have people out there. I mean, obviously there's someone I'm sure can override it if they needed to, but like, this is enhancing what the people are doing. It's not replacing them. Like, in my mind, when we get to full artificial intelligence, it's just gonna be like some machine that drives itself out on location and sticks holes in the ground and it can just do it all itself. I mean, like, we still have humans there. We're just making them better at what they do.
Yeah.
And or more consistent, which, you know, there's a lot of, to your point, there's a lot of value there.
That's exactly right. Yeah. We're not at I press a button that says, find me money, and it takes care of the rest, like permits, the whole thing. Well, you know, the other thing that we found is that getting the model working is great, but then 90% of the remaining work is in the training, earning the trust of the crew, but also how does that model then translate into real world action? And I'll give you an example. You know, depending on which drilling contractor you're dealing with, which auto driller, which control system, each one of those control systems has their control loop set up differently. And so rig A may allow you to overshoot a particular set point or a limit, I should say, by X percentage. But then rig B might be configured that if you touch that limit, ROP is going to 0, slack off immediately. And so we realized kind of early on over the last 6 months that we had to, at the software level, try to abstract that out, try to mitigate that by having the software do more. And so an example, recently we rolled out a wait on bit and RPM ramping so that when it determines it needs to make a change, or maybe the roadmap has changed because we've changed formations, instead of just going, well, I was at 37,000 wait on bit, let me go to 23.
Right. Just a hard.
And it's like, which causes dysfunction. We've got a stepping function in because we can't necessarily from the cloud know exactly how every individual rig is going to handle that change. So we have to sort of take on smoothing that out from the perspective of the end user, just as an example. So is that AI? No, it's scripting logic, but it's what's necessary to write on top of the AI to actually make it useful.
Yeah. Yeah. It's intelligent and augmented, right? It's just basically the same thing. And I think that's there's, again, everyone talks about the AI is going to replace my job thing, but I still think we're a ways off from that. And I think the iterative steps are AI takes away all the shit that you don't like doing, that's boring, monotonous, tedious, whatever, and enables you to do the stuff that computers can't do. And the computer does the other stuff that you don't like doing and are probably bad at anyway.
Yeah. And again, we've talked about it and you brought it up too. Like now you're consistently getting this 85th percentile, driller, and like the quality of your wells should always be, roughly at that. Whereas, it doesn't matter how good the person is, even if they're a 100th percentile driller, for 4 hours, you start to get an hour, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. Like, I mean, people just,
that person is going to go on days off at some point.
Yeah. There's fatigue, stress. There's all kinds of others. I mean, it's one of those things that's very hard to describe until you are sitting in a doghouse or on a frac van. And, there are moments where there's seemingly nothing going on and you're just sitting there, but then there's also moments where it's just like pure ass chaos. And you don't want to be entering a bunch of shit that's already being recorded into a spreadsheet just so that it can be put into a, PowerPoint.
And people ask us all the time, well, what about LLMs? What are you doing with LLMs, chatbots? And I think, what we found is that kind of two concerns. One, we are not going to, nor would we even ask permission to ask an end user, an operator, to put their data into Microsoft servers to run OpenAI stuff, right? It's just a non-starter. But there are things, to your point a minute ago, about what are things I don't want to do. One thing I hate doing is building dashboards. I hate trying to figure out, hey, go pull me all of the lateral sections for the month of August and graph gross ROP, on bottom ROP, utilization of software X, and spit it out. Like I could literally waste an hour just trying to do that. And one thing that we found LLMs can actually be trained to do is you can train it to use our query language. So then you can chat to the bot and have it build a chart. So is that earth shaking? No. But is it, to your point, removing something that I don't want to do and doing it in a much more efficient way? Yeah. So there's that. We had another experiment where we do right now across the street over there. We've got a 24/7 service center. We've got people who are experts in drilling completions who are answering questions. We thought, wait, they can't be cross-trained on everything.
Right.
Maybe we can train a bot to know everything about predictive drilling. And so shout out to Curtis Cheatham, our VP of R&D, fed everything that we've ever produced internally, all the SPE papers, all the PowerPoints about predictive drilling into a bot. Said, okay, now give me a summary. And it was all right, except it added in, and we control the pumps. It's like, but we don't. So, it was like 95% of the way there. And then it hallucinated, we control the pumps, which is not true. And is explicitly not true in any of the underlying documentation. So I feel like we're on the cusp of that, but we're also not quite there yet.
Yeah.
For really trusting it to give technical advice.
No, I think that's it's just like with all these things, right? Like it's a trust but verify in the early stages. And then until you are comfortable enough that you feel like you can either trust it or even I liken it to, it's the same as a Google search, right? Like if you know how to Google search, you normally get better answers than if you just type in a full sentence in a Google search. Same thing. I actually read one of our advisors sent me a paper this morning and it was about specifically getting rags not to hallucinate, to be 100% accurate. And the interesting like nuance that he found was that, you know, the way these work is just they're word predictors effectively, but they all go based on like, you know, these things understand parts of speech and nouns and verbs and all this stuff. And he did all these experiments, and it's basically, if you can do noun filtering before, that's his hypothesis. We're going to be looking at it and playing with it to see how much impact it does have. But he used some example about so-and-so queen the second versus queen the seventh. And, you know, so they both have V, or they both have II in Roman numerals and queen, and it references one instead of the other, even though the other one isn't in the prompt. And but it goes back to, you know, the root document in the RAG model has the modifier to the noun and that noun right next to each other. Therefore, it goes and it finds what it thinks is the next thing. And so it's like, you're right. I think we're quickly approaching much higher levels of confidence with these things. People are getting more accustomed to them. They're understanding like, hey, they're not going to be right 100% of the time. I need to take this with a grain of salt, but it can be an efficient way to do X, Y, and Z. And so it's fascinating. It's going to be fascinating in that space. But I was thinking about it the other day, and it's like LLMs are almost a forced product of the volume of data that we have, right? Like the volume of data continues to grow. And then ML was the first stab at that on the numerical data side of things, right? And now LLMs are essentially the text version of that, of like, how do we sort through all of this data that humans literally can't interpret or understand to try and figure out all these relationships and connections. But it's going to be very interesting to see how it all kind of shakes out in the future.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a great example. I saw something over Labor Day weekend. I had to go and recreate it myself because it was so bizarre, but somebody posted on Twitter that the newest version of Google's AI enabled search was saying that the Austro-Hungarian Empire had a space program. And I thought, well, this can't possibly be right. So I went and typed it in, and sure enough, it informed me that in 1889, the first Mars expedition of the Austro-Hungarians landed. And, you know, and then of course I had to look around and I realized that there's a tabletop game from the 90s called Space 1889. So what it had done is it had read something and treated it the same level, I assume, credibility as you know, real history. And it kind of struck me that you can have the best search and the best LLM, but if it's still garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, it always is. Yeah.
Well, that's what happens when you license all of Reddit's data and you don't actually do much ETL to it.
Right.
Or you think, oh, well, if it's got the most upvotes, surely it's the best answer, except humans are trolls on the internet. And now it's like, oh, if you want a cure for cancer, go eat rocks or jump off a bridge, like all these crazy, terrible answers. And it's like, as someone who's been working on the LLM side, that to me is just a direct result of, and it's one of two things. It's either the manager saying, I don't care, you don't have the time, push it. Very possible. Or just there's some kind of, I don't envy the job of having to figure out how to do that with.
Well, you can't possibly predict the questions that are going to be asked and validate any answers they're going to give.
Exactly. So it's like you're having to programmatically try and eat the ocean, and they just did the best they could with what they had. And so it's a wild thing, but it's at the end of the day, every single math professor and engineering professor I've ever had, garbage in, garbage out. And that is the basis for all of this stuff.
And, we're at Corva never going to solve all these things. Yeah. But one thing that we do feel like we can help with is data quality on the way in. Yeah. And so, first off, we're never going to have the staff to do all the different projects that our customers, be the operator, service company, drilling contract, like we're never going to be able to do everything. But our thought is if we can get the highest quality data, whether that be surveys, mud reports, BHAs, whatever, on the way in, and do all the correction as it happens. Because as you guys know, if we forget about it, 2 weeks later, it might as well not even happen. That guy's gone.
It's done.
That's it. And but then make that data available in a way that machine learning and AI algorithms can consume it, like in a Parquet file or something. So kind of, it comes in, we put everything in Mongo. You tell us how you want it out, right?
Yep.
And so we feel like that's one thing we can do, at least in the drilling and completions domain, to help our customers eventually leverage AI and like 50 different ways,
Right.
as opposed to right now, just drilling, just parsing PDFs, just building charts.
Yeah. Cause I mean, again, I'm assuming a lot of your customers are probably using multiple drilling vendors and all this.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're going to get the data in different formats from them. I mean, completion, we've talked innumerable times about completions, and luckily you're on the drilling side.
I was going to say, they're going to start commenting to tell me to quit ranting about how bad completions data is.
Well, then be better.
I was going to say, just do better, guys. Fix it for me.
But again, like that standardization of a format, again, now things programmatically downstream of that can work with it. Again, even if it's not optimized, we've talked about WITSML, even like, is it great? Yes, no. I mean, like it's great for some things, poor for others, but I mean, it's a standard nonetheless. People have been able to build things on top of it. But then, if you're able to provide clean data in a similar format where you can go back historically, and if you want to do that trained machine learning algorithm, like it takes one data munging, step to do not, oh, here's my Corva one, and here's my neighbor's one, and here's my, H&P, or Payson, or whatever, wherever they're getting the data from.
Yeah.
If they can get it from one source in a similar format, then
that's 80%
of the way there, right?
At the root of this. I feel like the industry got really turned off by ML and AI, and insert buzzword here, because we were promised all these things, which those tools can do if you have good quality, structured, clean data. But guess what? We haven't had any of that historically. We haven't needed it in certain aspects because we couldn't use it in these ways, right? But now it's like, oh shit, we've got all this data and it's all crap.
Well, yeah, I mean, that or some engineer or tech at a company built an actual useful model on the data, and there's a couple of problems there because A, it was probably too narrow focus and was for one pad or well, and it doesn't generalize, or B, well, that's great, but you actually didn't capture all the steps you had to do to get that data to a clean, ready state for that. And if you actually want to productionize that,
you were just running Python scripts on your laptop, that never get pushed in.
And now if you want to productionize it, now you actually need a data flow that's consistent in the format that you were getting it, and it needs to be cleaned in the same way.
Right. I built it on 1 second data, but I only have 5 second data.
Right.
Well, the other thing kind of that we've encountered, at least with some of these products, is that even if we get that model great in bench testing, like there's so many variables that the only thing we could figure out to do, and I say we in a very broad sense, I've been here 13 months. So keep in mind the prior 6 years were people, not me. But so the team figured out the only way to make it actually work and stay working is to have an automated correction factor. So this is a real-time application. It's drilling. There's dynamic stuff coming in. The only way to keep it dialed in was basically do a 75-foot look back every foot.
Right.
And sort of dial up and dial
like
down the weights and everything.
Kind of thing.
Exactly. So we're doing a 1 foot summary and looking back, and every foot that is feeding back in to try to keep the model on. And if we don't do something like that, one well on the pad was perfect, and the other two, they had to turn us off because the predictions were so bad, right? So, to your point, we can do all the data prep, we can build the initial model, but then if we don't have something to try to keep it dialed in, at least in these applications, in the real world as we're using it, it still won't work. So,
no, I think that window, I don't even know the proper technical term for it, but that whole windowing concept of being able to span time periods and look at all the fields and variables over that, and then use that moving forward. That stuff is a game changer for our industry because we have so much time series data, and Bobby and I have gone down that rabbit hole of like picking stage start and stop times using a model. And it's like, I can visually easily tell you the beginning and end of a frac stage, where they shut down, everything, but programmatically trying to code that in on 50 to 100 streams of, 1 second ASCII data is much different.
Right. And then, wait a minute, you build it for land unconventional and you want to run it on a offshore rig that's dual derrick with 2 different streams coming in. Wait, we're gonna have to change that.
Yeah. Or we're simul-fracking now, and we need both feeds in the same place because we want to see the communication. If there is communication, then we need FDI analysis on top of that.
Right. Oh, hey, can I run this for well control? Well, Yes, but we're gonna need good data. We're gonna need next to zero latency, and you are all gonna have to agree on what the definitions are and how many false positives you're willing to accept. That's so right now we've got a project to do predictive alerts for stuck pipe. So all three of the most common mechanisms, and thank God we've got an operator who's helping us. Because the most important thing for that is labeled data. You tell us, when was this event? What do you think the triggers were? What kind of mechanism was this? Just had to do with the tortuosity, what was causing it? And all that has to go in to the feature engineering and so on. And then you have to say, well, how many false positives and how many false negatives am I willing to accept? And it's like, well, we're willing to accept 0 false negatives and up to N false positives. But telling me I'm stuck doesn't help. So now I need to get between 5 and 30 minutes before the event.
Right.
And that just drives a whole nother thing. And so now we probably need good temperature data, and we probably need good mud data. And it's a lot of stuff.
So, and then is there bias in the labeling?
Exactly. Exactly. And so we can, we're kind of inching out, and I won't speak about all the completion stuff. Jessica probably talked about that when she was here, but it can be done with enough data and enough help from folks who are experts who can say, okay, that was definitely event category X. And I would look at, the cuttings build and these other things. And if you put those together, we can build a model that'll be better than guessing. And the goal is to get, 80%, 5 to 30 minutes before they happen in kind of a probabilistic manner. Right. Yeah. And there's no silver bullet. So, okay, we got different mechanisms getting stuck. We basically have to run all these things in parallel at the same time.
No, that's a very good point, because we ran into that, Bobby and I did, on the frac interference stuff, right? Is it's like, okay, we were working at a gauge company. We put the gauges on the offset wells, and on the frac well, you can see the treatment, and then you can see the frac hit on the child wells. But then it's like, okay, well, now what? So we know it's happening. We don't know. Sometimes it's good. Sometimes it's bad. It depends on formation. It depends on where you're at. It depends on spacing. It depends on how bad, Colin's Twitter handle is frac slap, because he heard that mentioned in a paper about frac hits. And the guy was quantifying, I think it was George King, was quantifying, well, you've got a frac hit and a frac bash and a frac slap, and there's different degrees of hits and stuff. And so it's like, that's the tricky part about a lot of this stuff, is it's like, we've got all this data and we know these things are happening, but we don't know all the time what to do about it. Or
and should we even make a change based on this? Because, we think it might be bad, but
Well, the dream, is that you get your AI models to predict the stuff before it's going to happen. And then you get your automation to mitigate it before it happens. Yeah. And, but I think the baby step for us is, well, let's just do a red, yellow, green indicator of how probable this bad thing is about to happen. And then, once we believe that as a group, as a collective of operator, drilling contractor, software provider, then we can decide, do we really want to trigger automation to try to mitigate it? But the other funny thing about that is, okay, great, AI, but now how do we alert people in the middle of the night? Because if it's just in a banner, then I can ignore that. And if it's just an email, then I can ignore that. And if it's a text to the DD, but he's asleep in his van, then is there an escalation tree for the alert? And then at what point does it call the phone of the vice president of drilling and say, you're about, And so there's all these sort of bits of, okay, we've been able to create the insight with some AI or some ML, but how do we then make it executable to be able to prevent the bad thing from happening?
Yeah. So with that too, because we know shit happens in the oil field. You mentioned the cloud, and obviously it's not a secret that Corva uses the cloud, but this predictive driller, is it running in the cloud or is it running on-prem, or can it be both? Because we are, on the edge rather, because we know that connectivity is not a guarantee. So how do y'all handle that?
Yeah. So it's running on the cloud. Okay. And so basically every rig we're on today has Starlink with cell backup. Okay. And that's probably 98.5%, 99%. Yeah. And that's good enough.
Sure.
We have had folks ask about, we're in the process of deploying Corva on-prem, or in specific geographies as the requirement of that oil company for data residency. So we're doing that piece. But currently we do not have any version of this running on an edge device at the rig. Yeah.
Is that always the plan, you think, to try and do it from the cloud, or is there any interest in pushing some of this stuff out? And the only reason I ask is because you guys do have it. It's not like pushing it to an edge device would be a new product line. The product itself might be, but you have an edge device that you guys have historically mostly on the frac side, I guess.
Right. Well, I think this is one of those cases where typically at least for my products on the drilling side, the drilling contractor, whether they be land or offshore, is very paranoid about owning that IT/OT barrier. And they typically have all the edge devices necessary. And so it's more of how can we agree, where is the API between us and you that you're comfortable with?
Yeah.
And then it's cleaner that way too, because then if they have their operator make, like, let's say a limit change, like I'll give you an extra 3,000 weight on bit, right? If they do that on their HMI that's under their control, and then they push that via API to us, then we know.
Out of your hands.
And if we push something back down to you, it becomes your clean responsibility at this, IP address, basically.
Right.
And so that's been the approach, at least on the drilling side so far.
No, that's smart.
So with that, and I think there's similar things that are coming up with this with AI, say Tesla's auto, driving vehicles, but like where does liability land on this, and where?
It's a really interesting question.
I mean, from like even insurance standpoint. I mean, I'm sure there's things you may or may not want to get into around some of this, but like just
how are those conversations?
Like how are those conversations? Gone? With the drilling companies and the operators and everything.
I mean, I think all I'll say on that is that all of these companies that are involved in any one of these operations have got, in our case, a software as a service agreement, in their case, an MSA in place that governs. If you think about it, people have been using ROP optimizers for a long time.
Sure.
And so this is sort of just an evolution of the existing legal structure between service company, drilling contractor, operator, third-party software provider. And I wouldn't say that there's anything particularly crazy or different about how that works, because we're still handing off what is ultimately a recommendation. But at the same time, we're taking the safety piece quite seriously. So, if we lose connectivity, according to whatever we and the drilling contractor want to agree to, kick us out, right? We lose control a certain number of seconds. If there's not a positive handshake, kick it out. Layer 2, okay, there's the rig limits that are built into the control system. You try to send something outside of that, kick it out. Layer 3, there's the limits that particular driller has keyed into that particular chair. If we try to send something outside of that limit, you're out.
Yeah.
So the idea is that we are in fact in control for on-bottom drilling, in the sense that we're sending the sub points that are being executed, but there are still 3 layers of safeties around that. Yeah. And if there's some kind of fluke where we try to send 80,000 weight on bit as the next set point, it will ignore it and kick us out.
Gotcha.
No, I think that's a smart. Again, it's it's augmentation to an extent, even though it is controlling. Yeah. It's not controlling without any bounds or without a human potential for an override. And
they have one button to press, to take control back.
Gotcha.
On top of the automated control.
No, I mean, I think that's, again, to me, this is a very iterative thing as far as the AI stuff goes. And that is like the true first step, right? Is augmenting human activity, behavior, making recommendations or predictions to prevent things from happening in the future. And it's the cruise control where it's like, hey, I'm on the highway. That doesn't mean I don't have to pay any attention. I still have to pay attention. Now it'll slow down for me if the person in front of me slows down or brakes or whatever, but I still have to drive the car, generally speaking. Yeah. But for those boring times, it's in control and it's within its bounds and its limits and keeps going.
So then, say more from a commercial side, like, is this, I mean, it may be both, but is it the, like neighbors or something like that, like saying we want to use, predictive drilling, or is it an operator saying we want to use Corva's predictive drilling and we want you to allow this on your rig? Just how does that work?
Yeah. So with neighbors, it's a partnership. We've kind of co-developed the fully automated version of this. So the team had been doing versions of predictive drilling in kind of advisory mode for about 5 years. Okay. And sort of the big breakthrough for us to get to actually in the control loop was an agreement inked with neighbors last February.
Okay.
But the reality is it is a joint sale to the operator.
Right.
Sure. There is an incremental additional cost, which I think the ROI is 40-1 or better. But at any rate, putting that aside for a second, it's absolutely a joint thing because, again, if the drilling contractor does not want to do it or the operator does not want to do it, it's not going to happen.
Right.
But yeah, we're lucky enough to have some great customers who are pushing to find ways to have predictive drilling work on a variety of other platforms, not just.
Let's unpack the 40 times thing because I'm curious. So again, a lot of people, laggards, whatever you want to call them, will say, well, okay, so what? It does it by itself. What does that mean as
so I'm glad you brought that up.
GM or the manager?
I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's very important to say, okay, we can all look at the DVD before and after, right?
Yeah.
And it is truly impossible to say what percentage of that difference,
came from
this software versus something else. And going back 14, 15 years, my first job at Novi, we had a real-time optimization center at Jack Rabbit Road. I had some engineers in there. They would call the rig and they would like, hey, it's time to do a drill off test. It's time to do this, time to do that. And this is back when people were spending like 25 days drilling a well in the Bakken. And we do a pad and we come back and we cut 3 days off. And they're like, well, you didn't do that. We did that. We're geniuses. We're not paying. Tear your invoice up, right? And so I think we've got to recognize that you should improve across the pad, right? From the first lateral to the last lateral, from the improvements expected. And there's no way that we can claim that this software is 100% of the difference because it's probably not.
Right.
But that said, and you'll just have to trust me on this. We're going to publish a paper later this year, but an analysis of the first 100 wells. But to the extent that we can normalize a well drilled with predictive drilling versus a well that was not drilled, that was to the best extent the same well design, same BHA, same tools, similar rig. Yeah. It's about 17 to 20% faster, basically, on bottom. And so give us credit for half.
Right.
That's my pitch, right? And part of it is because of the automation with Neighbors, they've got this deal, Smart Drill, part of this package where it automates landing the bit. It does a smooth handover between sliding and drilling. Like that is absolutely the automation's part of it.
Yeah.
But so when I say the ROI is 40-1, I'm not gonna say how much it costs right now, but basically it's not a lot. And if you give us credit for half of the savings you see on that DVD when we're used, I think is pretty compelling. But I want to add one other thing on that, which is that from sort of like 0 to 50% utilization, no statistical impact. From 50 to about 70% utilization, maybe single digit improvements, like consistently.
Right.
I can show it on a graph, improvements in ROP, don't really see any change to bit runs. But if we get over 70% and get into that sort of 80 to 85% of rotary footage drilled with this thing control, it's double digit consistently better than an offset that's being drilled without this sort of system. So the key is, that's why I was saying earlier, the key is we've got to convince the guys and gals of the rig to run it, because it won't do any of that if they don't trust it and we don't turn it on.
No, that's why I asked the question, because there's always this dichotomy of technology in the oil field, right? Is it's like, oh, well, that's really cool and it can save me this, but what does that mean? There's always that business argument at some point, right? Of like, how do I quantify this?
It's certainly the number one metric is always going to be what's avoided spread rate.
Even just cutting down the drilling days, like that's a simple one, right? But like those have consistently fallen since I got in the field, but I feel like I feel personally, there's no completely anecdotal. I feel like that time kind of plateaued the last few years, where it's like, okay, we can consistently drill whatever it is, 5 days. Now, I don't even know what it is now, but we can consistently drill at this rate. And so you start hitting that limitation of just what is humanly possible without augmentation. And so this is the next kind of iteration on that.
We can take another step down. What we're seeing in the stats is that we can take, this is not a wonder weapon, but there's a significant step of improvement for on-bottom rotary drilling. We can avoid trips. We can use vibration filter, stick slip filter, differential pressure derating to avoid bit trips.
Yeah.
And which is okay. Now we're saving completely
Right.
flat time.
Yeah.
Right.
So I think between the two of those, that's going to be the primary economic thing. What we don't have enough data on yet, but what hopefully, if we come back this time next year, we'll have enough data on is, are we actually drilling better wells? Right. Because, for years it's been, let's go as fast as possible. Let's pump as much crap as possible. But is it actually a better well?
Yeah.
And so part of the effort that my colleague Jessica is leading up is, okay, we've got drilling data, we've got completions data, we have some publicly available production data, and maybe Mr. Operator, if you share your real production data, we could figure out for you whether we're actually drilling a better well.
Yeah.
So I can't make that claim yet, but what I will say is, we don't beat up the bit. We seem to go farther between slides. Slide percentage seems to be lower with predictive drilling turned on. And that would all sort of be preliminary indicators that maybe by being more consistent with the application of the drilling parameters, we're drilling, quote unquote, a better hole. But even jury's out on that.
But I mean, these days with longer laterals, and I remember even back when I was at Conoco, there was a thing with an SPE paper, or maybe it was geology paper, I forget what it was, but it was about the sinks and sumps and the tortuosity of the well bores and just like the impact on production. Cause it's great you went fast, but now the thing's all over the place. Is it even in zone or whatever? But again, I think the longer the lateral, especially on more liquid rich wells, the more that it's harder to move that fluid. So if you have any of these little sumps, like it's not moving through there and it's hard to get it out.
I can't remember, that was at somebody's office in the last 6 months, and that just up on the whiteboard in the conference room, somebody had written, we can drill wells, we can't case. We can case wells, we can't frack. We can frack wells, we can't produce, or cement. I'm skipping through it. I just thought that was a very interesting mindset to have in the middle of the drilling team conference room. It's not just about, I know this is being sold as an ROP optimizer, but it's not just about drilling a little bit faster. It's about consistently delivering wells that you can actually produce.
Yeah. No, I mean, the other thing I think about there is just like, because one of the things Bobby and I worked on at one point was drill out monitoring stuff, right? And one of the primary reasons they wanted that is because they're doing it with workover rigs that still have analog gauges, and then they stick pipe, and then no one knows who is to blame because it's just on this little tally book,
right?
And that's it.
Yep.
And so, but then then we go through this, I build this business plan and business model for it, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm like, shit, man. You're talking about like $100,000, $200,000 minimum up to the whole cost of the well if they can't recover any of it. And so like, that's a really nice insurance thing. So I assume there's probably some of that as well on the drilling side, where it's like, hey, by implementing AI, we know that our percent chance of getting stuck or completely trashing this well significantly drop. And I'm not saying that we have a high as an industry occurrence of that or anything like that. But one well, I mean, what's the cost of a well now? A few $1,000,000 at least.
Right.
So like that in and of itself, you have that on your entire system could pay for itself just by preventing one in an entire year. Like, I know that's hard to quantify
that would
for
more than pay for itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, it's hard for operators to quantify that.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that like, that is the reality of what could happen.
I 100% agree with you. And that's one of those things that I think the data is starting to show is true.
Yeah.
But you can't sell it just on that.
No, you
right.
can't.
It's like, but I also want to see the DVD getting closer and closer to the left. Right. So we kind of, part of the issue of quote unquote selling, optimization software like this is that you kind of have to sell it at all levels, right?
Yeah.
So if I go speak to a company man or super, he's like, look, the only KPIs I have are I want it to drill smooth. I want it to drill fast.
Yeah.
If you do that, I'm okay.
Yep.
And then, you go to the drilling engineer and they're like, well, I want to avoid bit runs, whatever. And as you go up, it turns into dollars.
Right.
Yeah.
But basically you have to have a compelling enough solution at all levels for all those people to basically opt in.
Yeah.
And, I mentioned to you earlier, there's some things where, okay, if I can drill a well 20% faster without screwing up, like that's one compelling economic thing. But maybe there's some other things that are like 1 or 2 percentage point things that you wouldn't normally do. And so I'll give you an example. We added a feature at the request of one of the customers around tool joint mitigation, right? So, you're drilling, you're going through the rotating head, the joint ggets hung up on the rubber. So Exxon published a procedure a couple of years ago, maybe it was a year ago. I don't know. Time's a flat circle. Recently, where effectively it said, okay, based on where the joint's going to be, a certain number of feet before the middle of the joint, go into ROP control and get weight on bit up 10, 12, 15,000 out of the way so that you will not slow down every time, 3 times a stand. And you can see, especially if you're drilling more slowly or slower, if you're drilling slower, let's say under 250 feet per hour, you can see it. You can see it in traces right there. It's going, slowing down. But asking somebody to do that manually is adding like 20 additional interactions for that driller per stand.
Yeah.
And so it's inconsistent. And so that's the sort of thing where, of course, you could solve that with software. It's not even AI.
Right.
But are you going to do it if it's not tied to some other thing? So we were able to take something that maybe the well is 3%, 4% faster as a result of that, and add it on to this other thing as an additional service, or an additional feature, which otherwise would have just been, it's never going to get in my top 10,
But
so
again, but over the course of a drilling campaign in a year or, further, I mean, those are insane,
It's probably single digit to tens of millions.
Yeah. That's the thing that I'll never get over with anything on the service side is just due to the volume of at least unconventionals, right? It's like a 2% improvement is actually a significant amount of money when each well is $5 to $10 million and you have hundreds or thousands of wells. Like that's
exactly. If you can do it across the fleet in a consistent way without making things worse.
Yeah. On an individual basis, on an individual well, it doesn't look like that much, but 2% on 100, 250, $500 million.
I think we're talking about like the lid on your water bottle right there. Like, they've got thinner in the last few years because someone's like, well, what if we just made them half the size?
Yeah,
it's still going to hold water in it.
Take the extra olive out of the jar. Strategy.
They probably save how much money they save per bottle. I mean, fractions of a cent probably, but times however many bottles of water are produced every year. I mean, it's insane.
They compound too, right? Like that's kind of essentially where it's the same compounding interest principle, right? It's like 1 or 2% by themselves, not worth my time to focus on.
I'm faster to production. I'm a little bit cheaper, so I can do more wells in the same amount of time. And each one of them is incrementally a little bit faster production
and more reliable and safer and all of the other. That's going to be another really interesting thing. I think I haven't even really thought about this till this moment, but from a safety perspective, like it is so hard to operate a service company in the oil field because the minute you have someone on a location, you're liable for all these things and you need all these insurance requirements and all this stuff. And so it'll be interesting to see, like, as we start augmenting people or, putting more responsibility on less people in the field, my polite way of saying getting people out of the field, it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts the industry and these companies as well, because that's a huge amount of money that if you can because my AI makes us faster, safer, better, et cetera, we have way less safety incidents. We don't stick pipe on any of our well, all this stuff, right? Like that could have another bottom line impact that no one's even really thinking about.
It's funny. Previous company, we did some work for a offshore driller. Doesn't exist anymore. And, but they had enough data that they were able to say that instead of pre-reporting the planned amount of footage drilled to the insurance company on a quarterly basis, and then trying to go back and revise it and ask for a refund, what if we could write a script that basically summed up the footage drilled as it was happening and submit that every month? Because it's just the only reason it was quarterly was a pain in the butt.
Right.
And to be conservative, the estimate always had the planned footage.
Okay.
And then the formula for what your insurance was going to be was a derivative of what was the planned amount of activity in the form of footage. And so just the act of being able to automate this sort of very simple but onerous reporting task was going to save, like 7 or 8% per quarter on their expected insurance costs. Wow. And that's another one of those things where nobody is going to start a company to do just that. Right? But like if you've sort of bought into the idea that we want to have a digital platform for our drilling and completions data, and we're going to bring it in and we're going to put it somewhere where it's accessible, what are all the little things that you otherwise would never have been able to do, but now you could do?
Yeah.
No,
that's that. And then, throw on top, you haven't mentioned the price and I'm not asking for it, but you've hinted at, like a certain level. I have to assume this is a rounding error on an AFE
unless you're talking to the person that you're selling to, right?
Well,
that's
because again, when you get to the end of the year and like, again, this is just me off the cuff, and you hear, $100,000. That's like, I'm not paying that, but then like step back, like that's nothing on a
$10 million well. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I guess, the thing is, are you willing to spend the equivalent of a few hours a month to save a few days a month?
Yeah.
And if we can if we can help them believe that is what they're seeing, then it becomes, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's always going to be, and this is just my life experience, but there's always people that are going to say, well, it's too expensive. And then those are the people that will come calling you when they do finally screw something up. And that'll be the easiest sell of your life whenever that does finally happen. But it's software is not always the easiest sell, even if it's sexy and has really cool features and bells and whistles, right? Like,
and I guess it goes both ways. Cause and I know plenty of people that have production optimization software, and it's like, if I can save you 1 barrel a month or 1 barrel a day per well, that's, and you got 700 wells, that's 700 barrels a day times however many days. And like, this easily pays for itself. Yeah. And they're not wrong, but I mean, like, again, then it comes back to, can I even attribute this improvement to this?
Or if
you do that 10 times, then you're probably paying too much for stuff.
Are the production engineers and chemical cops assigned to that asset going to be in position long enough before they're rotated to even complete the sales cycle for that software?
Yeah.
That's a real,
very true.
It's a real thing. And, but anyhow, my sort of overarching theory is that there are a number of software things like that, where if you can just lower the barrier to saying yes by saying it's on this platform, you're already doing it. You already have you literally just have to say yes and we'll turn it on.
Yeah.
Like then instead of only the top 3 things getting funded, maybe we can get the top 7 things funded. Yeah. And to your point, what if it's like, okay, it turns out not only could you save 9 or 10% a year on your production chemicals, you'll have half as many wells collapse because they weren't treated. You can afford to put a modem on all the pumps to see when the pumps have broken down. You can afford to put a tank level sensor on all your tanks and see, oh my God, let's automate like there's folks some of whom have been in this building at various times who have platforms to automate ticketing, to go and ask your vendors to come fill that tank back up. And it's like, it's all possible, but if we can only focus on 3 things because they're so hard, it feels like you never get there.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's an enablement thing too, right? Like that's at the root of all of this. If you have good quality data, it enables you to do so much more than if you don't, and then you start bringing in the partners and the integrations and stuff. And it's like, hey, everybody now has good quality data, and look at what kind of cool shit we can all do together.
Exactly.
Which is what tech has been kicking our asses at forever. And I'm glad that people like you guys are finally starting to push the industry forward by having these, partnerships and these integrations. And I mean, even, we haven't gotten into the Corva platform at all, but even just being able to write your own code and have your own templates and all of this stuff, right? Like I think that's almost an expectation for, our generation in the oil field, and definitely will be for the younger guys. I mean, my dev, or I guess devs now, we hired another intern this week. I've got 2 interns at U of H, and they speak a different language basically. And, have all these, they're just, they're young kids. Right. And so it's like, it doesn't go backwards the younger the oil field gets, right? Everything becomes more digital, more instant, more, mobile, everything. And so it's just so refreshing to see people that are actually, going out, integrating, providing real value to real problems that, the entire industry really has. So
I was wondering, any new features that are coming up that you can tease, or even new products that maybe are in the works that you are willing or able to, or something you're excited about? Or
so on the predictive drilling side, we're just continuously iterating. Basically,
well, so give the audience an update on that, as far as like how, because I have followed you guys. I'm good friends with Kyle Dahlgren. We've had Jessica on and stuff, but you guys have been, very active with the drilling. What is the appropriate verbiage for this? Because I don't want to screw it up, and I want to make sure I get it right.
There's the Corva drilling platform, which has got about 300 rigs on it, about 140 of our own applications, and about 40 to 50 partner or customer applications, where, to your point, they've used the dev center to build their own stuff, and that's theirs, but we're the platform, outsourced platform to service us, basically. And then predictive drilling is sort of one application within that. We talked a little bit about the predictive alerts, which is sort of the next step in there. In terms of what are we doing with the app, incrementally, of course, we want to integrate with other control systems eventually. We want to make it easier to share plans between rigs. So a common thing will be, hey, what do those guys do? They drilled so fast that bad.
Right.
Can I make that one button where I can go and get their settings that are at formation and depth appropriate adjustments, and with one button put that into my rig? So there's some things like that which are not sexy but like very functional.
No, it's we've had multiple conversations about how like there's no I use the term knowledge extraction because I can't think of a better way to put it, but there's nothing like that at the field level where it's like you literally have the drillers calling each other, telling each other,
right.
Oh yeah, I hit a gas kick at this, depth or whatever. And then it's like, but there's nothing actually capturing any of that information. It's just them talking on the phone or texting or whatever. And it's like, why isn't that being spread out through the entire org so that everyone learns from each other? And
yeah, we have a application where we've got coming out called geo drilling. And the theory is let's get everybody, every person involved with every type of data you can possibly think of, from the geologist to the driller, and comments, and hey, I want to attach pictures of stuff and put it in one app that everybody can see. So that's kind of in a similar vein. And I think where we're going over the next 18 months is, okay, we've got it. It can control. Now we're building dysfunction detection. So stuck pipe's one of them, but just auto driller dysfunction in general. Like for instance, for whatever reason, differential pressure is relatively low in the settings. We're starting to cause sawtoothing by having weight on bit or ROP overshoot. Instead of just having a little banner that says you're overshooting,
right?
Let's self-adjust it now. The dream here is that we get to, in this time next year, maybe we'll come back, bring some cool swag.
Let's do it.
The idea is that basically you're drilling a well, you're drilling the surface, vertical intermediate, maybe the on-bottom rotary part of the curve, and the whole lateral with this thing in control. And the only thing you have to do is put in the BHA tool limits, which we already collect for you anyway, and transitions of interest. So if you're going to hit Brushy Creek,
that's crazy,
and you want to slow down to 225 feet per hour for the first 50 feet of Brushy Creek, you put that in, and there's no roadmap. It just drills.
Yeah.
That's kind of the vision for the predictive drilling piece of this.
How many wells are y'all up to now with that?
So I think as of this morning, we've done about 135 wells.
That's awesome.
And we've done, I guess that's probably around 725,000 feet. We've fluctuated. We've been on as many as 15 rigs. We're currently on, this morning we're on 8. We're on 8 rigs this morning. And the Bakken in Permian. We've drilled some in the Haynesville. Next month, we're going back up to Canada. So nice. And then we've got some step outs planned down to Latin America as well. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool. I love seeing new useful tech actually being adopted by the industry. It makes me happy. I want to wrap it up. What time are we at?
Yeah, probably right at an hour or so.
Okay.
It always goes quick.
Yeah, it sure does. We could talk about this for days. So at the end, we kind of wrap up with just like a random speed round where we'll pepper you with just some random stuff.
Okay.
Nothing crazy. What about some books or even podcasts or anything like that you'd recommend or you like to listen to or read?
Okay. Well, I'm part of the way through a single volume history of the Assyrian Empire, which I previously knew next to nothing about that part of the Bronze Age. So that was actually pretty interesting. And then went down the UFO kick recently. So I just read Lou Elizondo's Imminent. If you buy into that, basically Roswell was real. They're here, and the Army's been and the Air Force has been lying about it for 75 years for us. So it's kind of a fun little side hobby to not think about real world at all.
And is that realistic fiction, or is that is it like just kind of a theoretical kind of like?
Wow, how much time do you have? There could be a whole other podcast. Let's put it this way: there's some weird things happening.
Yeah,
and since 2017. A bunch of Navy videos have come out showing weird stuff.
Okay.
And so as Senator Marco Rubio put it, either 1, there's aliens, it's the biggest story in history. 2, it's all secret tech. Or 3, we've got a bunch of crazy people with top secret compartmentalized information stuff running around the Pentagon convinced that UFOs are here. So any of the 3 of those are probably pretty interesting out there.
Interesting.
No, that's I love going down those rabbit holes personally. It's a fun brain exercise. Yeah. I also just think that part of the disinformation campaign is making things conspiracy theories so that everyone that talks about them becomes conspiracy theorist, and then all of them become actually
the whole thing could be a psyop.
Yeah, come to find out they were all real.
Your hobby's a psyop.
Laptops and all the other fun stuff. Anyway,
about one more favorite restaurant in Houston.
Ooh, all right. I have to say I really enjoy Jonathan's The Rub over there on really I-10.
Mm-hmm.
Have you been to the other one? I've only been to the one on back behind Memorial, because I know there's one off I-10. There's one back.
I've only been to the one at I-10 and Campbell.
Okay,
but that's my go-to on the way home. Love the food.
Yeah,
very reasonably priced.
Nice. Well, where can people find you? How do they get in touch if they want to?
Yeah. So
set you guys up.
You can see me on LinkedIn, William.Fox at Corva.ai. Anything to do with drilling, I'm your guy. If it's something else, I'll find the right person in our company to talk to you about it.
Nice. Awesome, man. We appreciate it. Thanks for coming on this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for walking over.
Yeah, we'll have you guys on next year with everything.
All right. Sounds
all
good.
The updates, man. I appreciate it. Guys, thanks for listening. Make sure you give us a like or subscribe, give us some comments, and we'll talk to y'all next time. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank y'all.